Well, maybe.
Hi, Ruby.
Hi.
Everyone, this is Ruby Moses, and this podcast is The Creative Mind. And this is the first time we've done a guest, and so I'm super excited. I want to tell you a story. Sherry, my friend, was working with a lady that was 82, and she was doing her yard, and she started talking about Matthias's learning style. And the lady said, I think like that. You mean all this time when I thought I was stupid, this is what was going on?
Mhm.
That was her response. And it's for people like her that the creative mind is for. So, Ruby, talk to us about who you are.
Well, my name is Ruby Moses, and I am in Nez Perce and Ogallala Sioux Native American. I am the youngest of 10 children, and I have 4 children of my own. Um, let's see. Sorry, I don't usually talk about myself. Um, so I grew up kind of in Well, we grew up very close to the reservation. However, my mother had us just off of the reservation because she was very adamant on us not only learning our culture, but also um, making sure that we didn't like use it as a crutch. And so we grew up very close to the reservation. I grew up, all of my first cousins were like brothers and sisters. So it wasn't just the 10 of us. You think of 10 children and think, wow, that's a big family. But when you think about all of my first cousins, my mom was from a family of 10. And so we had a huge 3-story house and they were always there. They would come and stay with us for extended periods of time. And I remember one time asking my mom, um, how long our cousins were going to stay. And she was like, it doesn't matter. They're here. They're welcome. They're always welcome. And I was like, that's really interesting. So I not only grew up with my mom as my authority figure, but it was very important that we were taught to respect our elders. And so my aunts and uncles were very much a part of my upbringing. And so being raised by a tribe was very real in my upbringing. And I can really see the value in that because I not only learned manners and values from my mom, but I also learned it from my aunts and uncles as well. And because I had so many cousins around all the time, we really had to learn how to get along. We had to learn how to communicate. We had to learn to work through um, issues when things came up. And you really learn how to deal with other people that have different personalities than yourself. And I think that that shaped me for the rest of my life because almost every single one of my jobs, I've been a supervisor and been responsible for supervising um, a lot of people or training them. And so I've worked with a lot of different personalities and been very successful at it. And I think it's because of the fact that I had learned that at a very young age, how to learn different learning styles, different personality types, and to work with them. So, yeah, that's just a little bit about me.
I love it. So, one of the things I love about the way you learn is you're strategic. Can you tell us about that?
Well, um, so in a situation, we'll be talking about, some maybe cleaning the room or something. immediately in my head, I very quickly go through multiple scenarios very quickly and try and come up with the most efficient way possible. I don't know. I don't know where that started, or, I guess as long as I've just always kind of been that way. I took a survey from Gallup, and it was kind of funny because the lady was like, "You are extremely high and strategic." And she said, "Have you been a supervisor?" And I said, "Yeah, most of my jobs have been supervisor roles." And she said, "That's because you're very strategic. You're able to see a situation and define the best path and rule out those um, ways that won't work very quickly." She said, "Do you ever run into situations where you get frustrated because other people aren't there?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah. And so she gave me some tools, and she was like, sometimes asking questions to be able to um, create awareness or allow people to come to that realization um, would be very helpful." And so that's one of the things that I've been really implementing lately. It's been very helpful.
Yes. So being strategic, particularly in your job in Lapway,
Mhm.
what's that title?
I'm the city clerk treasurer.
Okay. That kind of thing makes it really necessary to see the bigger picture, to get to the bigger picture. This is going to work. This is not going to work. And how do we do this? One of the conversations that you and I have had is, how do you read people?
Mm.
Because when you're working with a group, you got to know what they're thinking and how to help them work together. So how do you read people?
Well, there's a couple of different ways. One, I'm listening to the tone in the inflections of their voice. I really watch eye movements and body movements. Um, when somebody says something, but it's not lining up with what their body language is saying, or maybe the tone in what they're saying, I ask questions to clarify to make sure that I'm picking up on what they're saying. And when you said about being strategic, it's very important that I clarify when there's those situations, because when city council or the mayor give a directive, I'm the one that has to make sure that that's carried out and that it's carried out correctly. So a lot of times, if we're brainstorming an idea, it's important that I bring to the table the different things that we're going to need. Okay, if we're going to make that happen, here are some things that we're going to need along the way, or something that we need to put into place, or like sometimes that means that I'm writing a resolution for it to be adopted, or maybe an ordinance that's going to be a part of our city code.
Very cool. So one of the things that have come up, and like Matthias sees pictures.
Mhm.
What do you see in your mind?
Generally, it's words. I either see it or I hear it. So, and generally it's attached to something. So even when I'm teaching something and training someone, I try to um, connect it to a story, something that is relatable. And so I tend to, when I'm um, learning, I tend to learn better that way. Um, whether it's attached to emotion or an example. A lot of Native Americans, when they're doing storytelling, it's very effective rather than just reading about it in a book, about our culture, because talking about what has happened over history and feeling that emotion and hearing the influx and seeing how it affects the person that you're that was telling the story. Whether I was learning it from my mom or maybe an uncle or grandpa. Um, when they passed down those stories, they were so important to me and they were deeply embedded into who I was because of the fact that I connected to those. For example, my brother, when he was in junior high, he needed to learn geometry. And so my oldest brother sat down the three youngest kids, which was, I was the youngest, and he said, I'm only going to teach you this once, so you better pay attention. And immediately a red flag goes off in my head and goes, okay, this is important. He's not going to tell me again. I better pay attention. And so I sat there and really listened, even though he probably didn't even think that, I was second or third grade. When I got in high school and I took geometry, I got an A because he told me I better pay attention. He's not ever going to tell me this again. And so I connected to that and was like, oh, this is extremely important. I need to remember it. And it emotionally, I connected to that. And so it was something that stayed with me.
That makes
That
sense.
makes sense.
Oh, it does totally. Find out more and more the importance of stories when it comes to history and other things for everyone to really get hold of it and not lose it. The story that comes to my mind is in a fifth grade classroom. A dear Native American lady was invited in to tell her stories, and she felt so bad. All I have is my stories, and they're basically going, yes, but that's what we need to understand who you are. And that will mean so much for us. And she told the stories of having to leave her family to go to school. And the kids came up afterwards and patted her knee and said, I'm so sorry that you had to leave your home. That was so sad. And they fell in love with her, and she fell in love with the kids that day. But those stories the kids will hold on to far beyond that class, I'm sure.
Well, and that's a good example of history coming alive, right? Because if it's something that is being read in a book, not everybody's going to retain that information. Like I'm very visual. And so when I was learning history in school, I would look at the book and I would close my eyes and visualize it. And I would take the test and I would get good grades, but I didn't retain any of that. I mean, now you could ask me American history and, actually, I think it was civil government. It's kind of funny. Now I work for a city. But a lot of that I did not keep, I didn't retain it because it was just like I kept it for that short moment, but I never connected to it. It wasn't important to me versus those kids that were hearing her story and able to just feel that emotion and experience what she was talking about. That made history come alive. And you're right, they probably will keep that memory, and always remember her story.
Yeah. Or I remember Shirley doing the same thing. If she could find out somebody's story in history that she really connected to, that emotional connection, she would retain it and do fine on the test. But if she didn't do that, and Matthias is the same way, it's just a fact. Why remember a fact? The brain, the memory just doesn't want to do it.
Right.
So we had
Well,
been
and I
talking.
think,
Go ahead.
oh, sorry, I was just gonna say, just to talk about that, my granddaughter that I'm raising, she's in third grade. And so she was really struggling with vocabulary. And we would go through, every week we would get the words, we'd go through how to spell them, we'd look up the meaning in the dictionary, we'd talk about it, and she was just struggling to remember. And um, the school is doing they're trying out this new curriculum or whatever. And they started putting the words to like um music, like clapping their hands while they were saying different things. And the kids liked it, but then the teacher started allowing them to come up with their own ideas of how to connect to these words to remember them. And she said she couldn't believe all of their grades just immediately grew, and they were remembering their vocabulary words, what they meant, how to spell them, um all because she allowed them to come up with the the thing to connect it to, the how to remember it as a group.
Right. The association.
Right.
Yeah. And we had talked about that with Matthias, if they're more kinetic, they like a movement,
Mm-hmm.
that connects that word to their brain, or a picture, or an
Mm-hmm.
analogy, um, something that you can associate with. What most teachers think it'll be a word. So you
Mm-hmm.
put the word in the question, right? And the memory will turn on. Well, not everybody does that with words, but if
Right.
they can figure out an association. And more curriculum is coming out for elementary with associations done for the kids. But
Mm-hmm.
uh, your teacher found out if they found their own, it was more powerful.
Well, and they did start out with like you said, the curriculum. She introduced it with some associations, but then she let them come up with it and she let them play with it. I mean, some of them were cute little jokes or a little jingle or something. And because they came up with it as a group, they really bought into it and remembered. I mean, they did so much better, and it not only affected their vocabulary, but um, it affected their other grades as well. So.
Yeah. Why do you think it affected your other grades?
I think it was because it created interest. So when I was it was either third or fourth grade, I had this teacher and he was awkward. He was super, super tall, like 6 foot something. And when you're in third grade, that's huge. That's really, really tall. But he loved science, and his love for science made everyone in that classroom love science. We and I got an A in it. When I got older and I got into science, it wasn't the same. There wasn't that excitement. And I lost my excitement for it. But I'll tell you what, that teacher, he really had us all, because of his excitement, we were excited about it. We wanted to learn about it. We did experiments, and science was, we were able to connect to that, and it was, we saw the importance of it, and we could tell that it was important by how he was relating it to us, versus when we got older and they're just standing at a chalkboard writing down these different um, things that we're supposed to remember, or saying, okay, you have 30 minutes to read chapter 2. It just wasn't something that was important to us anymore. And honestly, I lost my love for science. So,
So he made it an experience
mm-hmm,
that brought in all your senses.
mm-hmm.
That's what I'm hearing, because you're doing experiments. So I guarantee there were smells. I guarantee there were smells, you know, but touching and feeling and, the motions going on. I mean, that's a whole experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I get that. Mm. Um, Going to back to experiences, one of the things I really was interested in is Native Americans do incredible dancing and the drumming. But what are they experiencing while they're doing that?
So a lot of people attend powwows, but they don't understand that dancing and the singing, we're all a part of worship. And so it wasn't just about dancing for show or the regalia or whatever. Um, a grass dancer, their outfit was to represent the wind. Um, Traditional dancers were to represent the eagles and hawks and the ones that were flying, but they pray while they're dancing. It's so much more, they connect with the music. Um, so I think that, there's a lot of commercialized but there's just so much more. There's a spiritual sense to it that they connect with, versus it just being like the drum is the beating of the heartbeat, and so when you're dancing, you're following that heartbeat, and so you start sensing when they're going to drop harder on the drum or make it faster, and so you start to move faster with it. And so that's one of the things that I love about it is that it's about prayer. And then also our ancestors taught us about it, and that it was for prayer, and that it was, um, we used to come together as a group, and um, it was more of a connection than just, nowadays it's to come together and there's prize money. And so it's a little bit different than what it had been in the past. But um, yeah. And then a lot of times too, there's storytellers. There's a lot, like one of the other ones is a hoop dancer that comes back, and they just, a lot of it's intuitive in how they connect to, and it's using all of their senses. It's not just dancing.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, you're going back to the storyteller, that same thing of connecting not only with your audience and the physical surrounding, but that spiritual, you know, knowing in the moment what part of the story to tell, what not to. Um, Guidance by your own spirit and what's there in that room.
Well, and to create a sense of community too, because there are certain dances that are specifically, they call them intertribal, and anybody that is there is welcome to come out and, you know, meet and greet and dance, together, all
Yeah.
together as one, not necessarily as Native American or non-Native American, or you're this tribe and we're this tribe. It's all together. And
Mhm.
so developing those relationships was another thing that they came together, and like I said, just growing up, you learn how to get along and how to communicate and have relationship, which I think is um, really lacking in the media world. A lot of people are so caught up in their phone that they forget how to relate to one another, how to communicate, how to be able to work through, when things come along and there are problems.
Yeah, I hear you. Wow. I'm looking at what we want to go through. Again, the regalia is about associations that comes up repeatedly within the Native American community, and it's so important. Um, and some of the beautiful drawings, and some of them are just decorative, but some of them have specific associations. You know, and I look at some of the beadwork, and it's amazing. And your family gets together all the time to do beading. What does that
Mhm.
mean to you?
So we started doing that because one of the things that we do in our culture is when somebody passes away, one of the ways that we help each other, we go into what is called mourning period, where we're just allowed to grieve. And so typically it's a year where you just kind of take a step back because like we were always taught, when you're cooking, to always do it with a good heart, because you're cooking for other people and you don't want to pass on negative feelings or thoughts, and so it's kind of the same way, like when you're grieving, to just kind of stay back and allow yourself to heal, allow yourself to go through those emotions, and be able to just really miss your relative. So we have a big family, but we've also lost several of our family members. And so um, we have a memorial after that mourning period where we give things away in honor of that person that has passed on. Um, just as a thank you, a gratitude, and so that people can remember them in a good way. And then also that signifies us coming out of our grieving, out of that mourning period. So we've been getting together doing crafts and making things, and it's been so very positive, because it's hard to get together and be in a room full of a bunch of people that are grieving, right? Because it makes the room tense or heavy, because everybody's very emotional. And so we started crafting, and so it kind of takes the pressure off of having to sit there and talk about your emotions or whatever. You can be in the same room and be learning something and have the excitement of learning something new. And so we've had different people teach. We've done making moccasins, beading something new, a bracelet, some earrings, just allowing us to get together and be creative and um, just heal. It's very, very healing for us to get together in a very relaxed manner, and also be preparing for that giveaway.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah, I was there at a giveaway, and afterwards there was the dancing that just said thank you. And it was incredible honor to be there. So, um, math. You are incredibly fast at math. So, tell us your experience and how you work with your grandson as he
So
has that gift.
it's kind of funny, because I didn't know it, but my dad was an accountant, and I love numbers. Actually, several of my brothers and sisters are all very good at math. Um, excuse me. I've always been, and I think that's partly the strategic, is being able to run through scenarios very quickly. And so um, there are times that I will know the answer and I won't know how I got to that answer. So through the years, I've had to learn how to, because, in school, a lot of times they want you to show your work. And so sometimes there were times that I would show my work and the teacher would go, well, that's it's not how they were learning, specifically how they wanted us to add tens and then the extra or whatever, but she would be like, that is a true path. And so she would accept it, because it was, I got to the same answer and I showed my work. It wasn't necessarily her process, but it worked. So my grandson, last year, it was kind of funny, because I like to, like, if they're going to get a treat or whatever, I will ask them questions like, spell this word or add this number or whatever. And I asked him, because he's in kindergarten, I just started out with single digits. And he's like, come on, Katza, which means grandma in my language. He says, come on, Katza, give me a harder one than that. That's baby numbers. And so I did double digits, and he's like, you can do better than that. It's harder. And he's in kindergarten. And I gave him 3-digit numbers to add together, and he answered fairly quickly. And he was correct. And so I gave him another one. And he's visualizing these numbers in his head and he can add them very quickly. And it's the same thing with me. You know, a lot of times I would see numbers or words. And so it's very quickly for me to come up with that answer. And that's what he was doing. He was, and my other granddaughters, she's 2 years older than him. And she was like using a piece of paper to write it down. She's like, how are you coming up with that so quickly? And he's like, well, I just see it in my head and that's what I do. And so, you know, just even growing up from the same household, and I've worked with both of them, you know, I always make sure that, you know, I'm talking to them so that they understand, and I ask questions to make sure that they understand. But the personalities, like he is so very visual. He's very creative. He is very good at math, whereas she prefers the writing. She prefers the vocabulary and the reading. And so the two personalities are so very different. Just
So
interesting
how
to
did you
watch
help
them
him
grow.
write down his process for his teachers?
So we went through um because they wanted him to create like right circles for each thing, and he's like, I can't do this. This is you know, it's kind of like when you're driving and somebody's going 5 miles an hour in a 25-mile-an-hour zone. You're like, I can't slow down to 5 miles an hour. And so I told him, I said, well, um how do you see it? And he will like literally write, he'll draw a picture of a something like an animal or something, and he can sit there and do, instead of 10 circles, he'll do 10 little animals or something that he can connect to, and then he could write it all out. But it was very painful for him to just, you know, and I get it because I was that way when I was a kid too. It was very hard for me to slow down and back up 10 steps to have to explain how I got there.
Mhm. Oh, I get it. I get it. We got to bring this to a close. When you took Matthias's learning style to your family, how did they respond?
They they totally understood it because that's the way that they learn. You know, and it's kind of interesting because so many people, like what you said, this lady, she's like, I just thought that I was dumb, you know, because they don't necessarily learn from somebody reading in a book or telling you you've got 5 minutes to read chapter 2, you know. And so when they don't learn that way, it is really hard for them to understand that maybe they just have a different learning style because everybody else in the room seems to be getting it, or they seem to be learning that way. And so, and especially with kids, it's hard for them to have that voice to be able to say that they don't understand because they don't, you know, like with Abel, with him adding it up, he knew that he had the right answer. I knew that he had the right answer, but I had to walk him through how to go back to explain that process. So our kids don't necessarily know how to voice that, you know, I'm not learning that way. I'm not connecting with it. So they don't know how to speak that to the teacher. And especially if everybody else in the classroom is getting it, you know, they feel ashamed or like they just are dumb, you know, and
Mhm.
it's really heartbreaking to think that because education's always been taught the same way, that it's kind of leaving out a whole class of people that are very creative. They're very brilliant. That's just not their learning style.
Yeah. I'm so thankful that education community is recognizing it, and they're slowly, it takes a while for them to figure it out, but they will.
Mhm.
But they're trying to.
Yeah.
So, do you have anything else that would you like to tell our audience?
Um, just, I would say that, you know, when, if you encounter somebody that it just seems like maybe, especially with your children, If they're not understanding something, ask them questions to find out what's going on. You know, it may not necessarily be that they don't understand. It could be that they're learning a different way. And so encourage them to be able to explain, you know, how what they're learning and find out how they're learning, because like I said, they don't understand that they don't have that voice to be able to say, hey, um, I don't understand, or they think that it's because they're not smart. And it's not that they're not smart, it's that they learn a different way. And it's important for us to encourage them so that they have that ability to learn, because Abel, he's like, I'm really smart, aren't I, Katza? And I go, you are very brilliant. Um, but from the outside, had we just been looking at it from, you know, you just can't write down how you got to that answer, so it must be wrong. You know, being able to walk them through that and have that conversation with the teacher, because teachers want to know, they want to be able to help their students, but they only see them for so many hours in a day. As parents, we are there and we see them so much more. So being able to be that advocate, like, you know, how you were with Matthias, you know, taking that time to see and understand where he's coming from and being able to be that help that learning process. So like with the kids as teachers, I always make sure that I go in there and I have conversations with them. I know them all, they know that they can call me and be a resource for each other, you know, to help that learning process. Because like you said, education is trying to catch up. They're understanding that there needs to be more for the education community, but it is a process and it's not going to happen overnight. So having these conversations is important.
Amen. Well, thank you so much, Ruby. I think this is going to bless our audience. Thank you, everyone,
Thank
for
you.
listening.